You're listening to HR Leader, inspiring you to lead the workforce of tomorrow.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the HR Leader podcast. My name's Jerome Doraisamy. I'm coming to you today from Camaragal Land in Sydney, and I'm very pleased to be joined in the studio by one of my colleagues. Steve Kuper is the lead of Momentum Media's defence and aerospace brands. Steve, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, JD. Thanks for having me. First-time listener, long-time caller.
Yeah. Steve is going to be making the case for reshoring and why it can and might create a more resilient, skilled and sustainable economy and workforce in Australia. Steve has quite a lot of experience in government and government relations. And as I said, he works on our defence brand, Defence Connect. And so he's going to be coming at this conversation from the perspective of the national interest and why reshoring is necessary. Steve, before we get into all of that, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career to date.
Well, I've come to a career in journalism, although what I do isn't your typical journalism role. Having never had a background in media or journalism, I've never studied it. But if you can write and you can distill complex ideas for the average punter, you can be a journo. So I've spent the majority of my career now working in government at both the state and federal levels. I've worked for a number of state ministers, two state premiers, one when he was the finance minister before he became premier. I've worked for a number of cabinet ministers at the federal level, the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations during the Abbott government. I've worked for the Minister for International Development in the Pacific during the Turnbull government, and the Minister for Defence Industry and Science and Technology in the Morrison government. So I've got a bit of a government bent, and then I've been a lobbyist for the infrastructure, urban development and built environment industry as well. So a bit of a weird amalgamation of jobs that brings me to where we are today.
And so having left working in government and now working for a media house, being Momentum Media
for the second time, I might add. Yeah,
that's right. You did boomerang back to us. What's your sort of interest in bringing that government experience to the defence and aerospace realms?
Well, most people would naturally assume that defence, by and large, is fairly familiar with the machinations of government and the way in which government policy is made, procurement is undertaken, and then the subsequent impacts on industrial policy and then employment and employment relations and all of those sorts of things. But that's not necessarily the case. So that's kind of my job is to break it down. From my observation, what we have, and this is not just a defence or aerospace sector specific phenomenon, we have hyper-specialised individuals in their respective fields. You're obviously hyper-specialised in your field. And that leaves a little, or rather a glaring, what we call in defence a capability gap. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just we all have busy jobs and busy lives. You've got kids, I've got kids. So people don't, unless they're actively interested in it outside of their day-to-day, they're not going to get or expose themselves to that level of knowledge and insight. So that's where I come in. I try to demystify some of the nitty-gritty that goes into forming policy, how it travels from a minister's office or a backbench MP's office into a department and then becomes more professionalized, or sometimes becomes more convoluted, watered down, and in some cases becomes completely unrecognizable. And then in some cases, stuff that comes up from the departments into government offices and then becomes policy. So it's breaking down those barriers and helping people understand how things work.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about reshoring. Now, for those who don't know what this term means, and I'll admit I didn't before you and I spoke about it. I think it was last week.
Yeah.
Could you give us an overview for what reshoring is and what it means in the context of the Australian workforce?
So what I will begin by doing is painting a bit of a picture of Australia's economic complexity. So Harvard University does a biannual report thereabouts, and it's called the Harvard Atlas of Economic Complexity. And it measures the economic complexity of every nation in the world. So in 2023, Australia was ranked 105th out of 145 nations. And for some context, in 1995, we were ranked 55th.
Right.
So what we've seen is a steady decline in the overall economic complexity of the Australian economy.
Yep.
And that's translated. And I quite frequently joke about Australia's economy being little more than holes in houses. And we do have a services sector attached to that. But those industries are by and large also have a very tangible impact on the level of productivity in the economy, which we know is of growing concern for the Australian government, as well as just our overall health as a economic nation. So reshoring has gained a lot of traction, particularly during and after COVID, when a lot of nations went, global supply chains can be constrained, can be choked, and in some cases can be completely cut off. And Australia was really at the forefront of experiencing that when we realised we didn't even make hand sanitizer, right? So we saw the Archie Rose distillery in Rosebery convert from making gin, which I know is a favourite of yours, and whiskey and spirits to making hand sanitizer. The Australian public health system and private health system is currently experiencing or at least as of October, November last year, was experiencing a IV bag shortage. But we have an IV bag manufacturer in Penrith. And, there are these things that people don't necessarily see that kind of serve as the foundational bricks of the national economy and our day-to-day life that they might not have their hands on, but they don't realise just how lacking the Australian economy is. So reshoring came out of that. And we saw, again, with COVID, there was the PPE argument and conversation. And then, of course, there's the liquid fuels. Australia only has, I think it's about 2 weeks worth of liquid fuel. And liquid fuel is not just petrol that you put in your car. It's diesel for agricultural industry. And it's also what a lot of people don't realise is crude oil, and we only have 2 refineries left in Australia. Crude oil actually goes into everything. It's in every part of our day-to-day life. So if you start to lose access to those fundamental inputs to industrialised economies, you go to barbarism very quickly. I think there's an old saying that civilization's only ever 2 or 3 meals away from barbarism. And perfect example is during COVID. Look at how quickly Australians devolved into fists at 2 paces in Woolies and Coles aisles because they couldn't get access to toilet paper. So it's really something that's starting to come home And we've seen the Australian government start to take that a little bit more seriously, which is part of the National Reconstruction Fund, as well as some of the Building Australia's Future and Buying Australian efforts through Commonwealth government. So it's interesting.
So is reshoring a new idea that's come out following the age of the pandemic, or is it something that's been the idea has been around for a number of years since globalization became increasingly present, around the world, and has just really picked up pace in recent years?
Yeah. I think there were nations that never really let their industrial bases go. Germany's one of them, although they have really hindered themselves with their energy transition, and we just saw their chancellor come out and say the early retirement of their nuclear industry after the Fukushima incident was a complete blunder. So that's had some dramatic impacts. And then Japan's another one, never really let its manufacturing industry go. South Korea is obviously one. The US, to an extent, didn't let its manufacturing industry go, at least at what people would consider the heavy manufacturing. But Australia, the UK, and a couple of Canada, to a degree, all really kind of doubled down on globalization, and it's really been one of the driving forces for global politics in the last decade. So reshoring in and of itself as a concept is not old, but it's not new either, because up until the 1980s, into the 1990s, and particularly it accelerated post the end of the Soviet Union. Prior to that, nations were industrially sovereign. They manufactured virtually everything, right? And part of the conversation and part of the argument that you hear against reshoring is that, well, we can't compete with low-cost economies like China. Now, newsflash, China's actually not a low-cost economy anymore, and they haven't been for a long time. Is Tim Cook still the CEO of Apple? I think he is.
I believe so.
He did an interview early or mid last year, and was basically saying that China's now in the middle income trap, and that presents problems for Apple, which is why they have shifted a lot of their manufacturing of iPhones and other things from China to India. So we have to get out of this mindset of, if we're going to reshore, that we're going to be competing on every aspect of manufacturing. Now, I don't think anybody would be advocating for Australians competing for low-cost manufacturing jobs or low-cost hands-on jobs in textiles or I'm just trying to think what else. We'll use the textiles industry as an example. When you've got markets like India and Bangladesh and Turkey, Thailand, all of those sorts of economies that are starting to rise up out of the low income into the middle to higher income trap. Or I'll put it a very simple way. Australians are not going to make, and should not be seeking to make, Kmart, IKEA, or Target knickknacks. There's no value add there for us. There's no comparative advantage for Australians to be doing that.
Sure.
Reshoring as a concept should be focused on high value add, high skilled, very niche jobs.
So tell me a bit more about why you think there's an urgent need for Australia to reshore on some of these or in some of these sectors or some of these areas, because there's obviously a lot of chatter about ongoing inflation and cost of living, which is
government induced, but that's a separate conversation.
Which is obviously problematic, but I would say it is also not drastically horrible levels either. So why should we be urgently looking at reshoring in certain areas of the economy?
Look, ultimately, it comes down to a sovereignty thing. If you're not a nation that makes things, you're not really a nation. I think a lot of, depending on the average age of the listeners of HR Leader, many will remember the tin pot banana republic comments made by former Labor Prime Minister Paul Keating right up in the lead up to the conversation around the recession that we had to have. Well, despite Mr. Keating's best efforts, Australia is a banana republic. We just don't have the tin pot dictatorship kind of governance structure at this point. So when you look at, and I'll come back to the economic complexity argument, Australia's economic complexity puts us somewhere between Namibia, there's a couple of other African nations there, and then we really are wedged amongst industrialized economies, quote unquote, like the Seychelles, Caribbean nations, and even New Zealand outcompetes us in terms of economic complexity. So it's a sovereignty issue first and foremost. Now, I do think that as our economy has become more professionalized, there has become almost a upstairs downstairs mentality that people who do things with their hands are somehow dumb. Which is the furthest thing from the truth. Now, if you look at some of the manufacturing jobs, particularly in the US, for example, now you can't realistically say that American workers in Audi, BMW, and Mercedes factories in the southern states, or Airbus's new factory I think it's in Georgia. I could be wrong. It could be Mississippi, or it could be Louisiana, which is making Airbus aircraft for the global market, are significantly lower paid than Australian workers.
Yeah.
And what we have to understand is that the manufacturing economy of the 21st century is not necessarily lines and lines of men and women on production lines. It's people working in conjunction with automation who are quite often very well educated. They are industrial machinists. They are industrial manufacturers, which is a very different skill set. As well as coders, design engineers, a whole host of things that are working within the confines of an automated system of systems, to steal a defense phrase, that go into producing things. I was lucky enough in, when was it? Was it September, October of last year to travel to the US, to California, to visit. For people who are Lord of the Rings fans, I know you are.
I am.
There is a defense company called Anduril, which is obviously Aragorn's sword.
Yes.
And they manufacture. Their whole premise is that manufacturing should be done at scale by somebody you can pull off the street. So they do a whole host of industrial design and manufacturing around producing equipment for the United States military as well as the Royal Australian Navy. They're building our new autonomous underwater vehicles actually in Alexandria. So they do it. They are designed from the ground up to be done at scale, and even at the most basic level, part of the design premise is that you or I could go to Bunnings. We basically get given the instructions, and within an hour we can turn out cruise missiles. So that's something that comes into that sovereignty thing. Now, that's obviously a defense focus, but there are a whole host of things. Pharmaceuticals. There is inputs, industrial inputs. Now, a lot of people think in construction it's just steel. Well, no, there's different grades of steel that have to go into it. That requires a manufacturing process. There is microelectronics and microprocessors, which are becoming the arguably the oil of the 21st century, particularly as artificial intelligence and AI data centers grow, are going to play an important role, and Australia can play a role in that, and it's not dumb jobs.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Australia's role, is there evidence you can see that Australia is already starting to reshore in certain areas? Like speaking of defence, which is of course your area of expertise, Adelaide is has become a real hub for defence industry production. You mentioned the Archie Rose distillery a bit earlier in the conversation. There are countless liquor distilleries, boutique ones popping up all over the country. And
some fantastic ones, by the way.
Absolutely, and not just liquor, but also a lot of boutique beers, craft beers popping up. So, I mean, from the outside looking in, it seems as though there is a lot of production happening here in Australia, perhaps more so than before. So, I mean, are you optimistic about some of the signs that you might be seeing?
Yes and no. And I think one of the big problems that Australia has traditionally suffered with, and it's part of the reason that Australian industry, I'll use the car example. So everybody will know that Holden, Ford, and Toyota, were ultimately not cost competitive against their international markets and their international competitors. But why is that? Part of that is because, and a major part of that is because of labour costs for the workforce. Then I think it was at the end of the Ford production run, for every single car, they had to sell 4 cars to pay 2 workers. So that's where you go, okay, hang on a second, but that comes down to, where are the cars being sold? Now, Australia is a small market where we're just under 30 million people.
Yeah.
The way in which you generate cost savings across manufacturing is by scale, and that's where we need to look. And a perfect example of how that is being done with quite astonishing results is South Korea. Now, they embraced, after the Korean War, a economic concept called export-oriented industrialization. And what that basically meant was that the government was going to pick some winners, and Taiwan did the same thing. They were going to pick winners, and they were going to back them up until a certain point, following which, if they could not stand on their own, they were let go. And they were given the express mandate that you would go out and you would be world beating.
Yeah.
And now Hyundai, Daewoo, Kia are global brands. Hyundai's the second largest shipbuilder in the world. And then there's obviously TMSC, which is the Taiwan microprocessor and semiconductor facility business, which is one of the world's largest businesses, Samsung. All of these businesses started by having some degree, and it's not, protection's not necessarily the right word, but it's a commitment from government to pick winners.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me about the nexus between reshoring and our unemployment rate. And forgive me if I'm drawing a nexus that doesn't exist, but Australia's unemployment rate is pretty low and has been for a number of years.
Yeah.
So how can reshoring how can reshoring work, if our unemployment rate is already quite low?
Well, look, let's look at what how many people are unemployed under the labour force definition, which is actively seeking and available for work, and we're at between 640 and 660,000 people.
Yeah.
So not a small number, and then when you add into when you take into account that about 1.5 million Australians are underemployed, you start to really think that's about approximately about 10% of the population is it 10%? Yeah. Of the national population is either unemployed or underemployed. So now that obviously you then also have to take into account that there are disability support pensions and things like that. But I've been lucky enough in my previous careers to work with a lot of disability support agencies and disability businesses that actively employ people with disabilities. And one thing I will say is that they are absolutely overjoyed and excited to be contributing to the national economy and to be contributing to life and having the dignity of a job. So there is that issue around there. And I know what a lot of people will say, that there are a lot of jobs out there that Australians don't want to do. Here's my counterpoint. What are you paying? Why do Australians not want to do the job?
I don't know. What's the answer?
Well, the answer is that they don't want to do the job because the pay is not.
Oh, sorry. I understand the question now.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So that's where the skilled migration and migration as a economic factor comes into play. And what you're seeing through things like the Pacific Mobility Scheme, which is basically the introduction of the Kanakas scheme, which was quite transformational for the agricultural sector, particularly in North Queensland in the 20th century, taking place, and that's basically indentured servitude, and that's a problem. Right now, that comes back to farmers say, well, we can't afford to pay people that. So there is a degree of economic, it's not vampirism, but it's probably the only term I can come up with.
Okay.
And we are, in essence, taking advantage of migrants. And you see that across the gig economy through things like Uber Eats and DoorDash and a whole host of things. And there's a series of problems with those sectors. And then that obviously then, I think, what was the migration data for last year? It comes down to supply and demand. Now, if there is an oversupply of people who are quite willing to work for those wages, they're going to continue to put downward pressure on those wages. So there's no incentive for businesses to employ Australians. And that's a real problem.
Yeah.
That's a very, very real problem, because what you're doing is you're taking away generations of Australians' opportunities to learn real life skills, engage with people, learn how to manage conflict, learn how to manage multiple different competing priorities, and doing so while having the dignity of a job. I was thinking about this the other day, and I can't remember if I mentioned it to you, but do you remember the Dougie the Pizza Boy ads?
No,
from
I don't.
Pizza Hut?
Oh, maybe if I saw it. This is from the 90s, I'm guessing.
Yes, yeah. Like how many young Aussies would love the opportunity to have their first job being Dougie the Pizza Boy?
Yeah, sure.
And you're taking away those skills. Now, they might seem like very menial skills set against the broader requirements of the national economy, but you've got to start at a foundational level. And if you can't, and we've got Gen Z work colleagues in the office, and you and I talk about them at length, in a good way. Just in a good way. It's just it's very different to the way in which I have been taught how to act within the professional environment and how to conduct oneself in the workplace.
Yeah, well, there are a multi-generational workforce now, and there are differences between those generations.
There are very, very real differences. And, I do sympathise for and with a lot of these young Aussies. And it's not just young Australians, it's young Brits and young Americans who are looking at the system and going, why would we work? Why would we bother?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't get a job. The job that we get, we barely are able to pay rent, let alone afford to buy a home and have a family. So at the macro level, it's about national sovereignty. At the micro, at the individual level, it's about giving and empowering young Australians to have that ability to build a life.
Yeah.
Right? And we hear constantly about a skill shortage. Well, the skill shortage and Australia's need for skilled migration began in the 1990s in earnest. That narrative around us having a skill shortage began in the 1990s. We're now in 2026. I nearly said 25 then.
Yeah.
Surely we've had enough skilled labour to have met our skill shortage.
Yeah.
Now, shortages. Now, obviously that's not a static, those figures aren't static. But what are we doing to build the skills amongst young Australians? And that comes back to the reshoring, which is something that is really taking place in the US under President Trump. I know he's quite a controversial figure. I know he is with you. But building those skills from a young level is important. Now, we've seen fee-free TAFE brought in. Okay, what's happening with that? How are people actually benefiting from that?
Yeah.
And university qualifications. Now, I don't know about you, but all of my professional experience, bar my time as a butcher, I forgot to add that one in there.
Yeah, I remember you did that.
Yeah, bar my time as a butcher, I didn't need any of my professional qualifications at all.
Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, there's an argument to be made that some of those entry-level jobs, for lack of a better phrase, like working at McDonald's or Pizza Hut, they're really character building for young Australians coming through the ranks. And if, as I recall reading a little while ago, McDonald's is moving much more towards having, the machines where you make your order. Then, those are certain jobs that would develop, social skills, professional skills for young Australians as they as they enter the workforce, and that is a shame, for those certainly teenagers and young adults to lose those jobs that, as you say, may not necessarily be applicable if they become a lawyer or an accountant, but there are, and not at face value, there might not be transferable skills, but there are good life skills to be learned there.
And I want to, there was something that I saw yesterday, and I've just pulled it up on Twitter, and this comes back to what I was saying about the Korean and the Taiwanese models. And that is that government, it's not intervention, it's direction. And this is an example from, it's from the 1940s, so bear with me. But Ford and General Motors and Consolidated Aircraft, as they were then, built a factory school to train 50,000 farmers in the 1940s. Now, let's not forget that they would not have had even the basic level of education that we have today coming out of high school. 50,000 farmers on how to become aerospace technicians. It cost the businesses $500,000 in then's money to build. It had 10 courses, charged no tuition, and guaranteed a career upon graduation. No resumes, no 6-part interviews, no workforce shortage. And as a result of that, this is one factory. America built, one of the most prolific bombers during the Second World War was the B-24. From that, they built B-24s, and they were turning out one aircraft every hour. It is now, to this day, still the 12th most produced aircraft in the world. From farmers who were brought in out of the fields to address a shortage domestically. We can do this. There are models there are models that have been done and have been trialled successfully and done successfully. You've probably heard me say quite frequently on the in the newsroom, one of my favourite sayings is that success leaves clues. If you want to be a fitness influencer, you follow somebody and you follow the example of somebody who's been a fitness influencer, a successful one. If you want to be a doctor or a surgeon, you follow the example and the lessons of somebody who's been a successful surgeon. If you want to be an industrialized economy, you follow the examples of a successful industrialized economy.
Yeah. So you've started to answer my next question already, but I want to talk about what needs to be done if Australia is to move towards a more reshored economy. We'll start off by talking about from the government level. What needs to be done?
Policy, and regulation. So I am, and I think this was actually the genesis of our initial conversation, which is the concept of national capitalism. Now, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has come up or has reinforced the use of a terminology, a phrase called stakeholder capitalism, which is basically special interest capitalism for select client groups. And big ones are the housing industry, the superannuation industry, and I don't think that's a secret. I think that's fairly common knowledge. People might not necessarily have a name to put to it, but it is in essence. Yeah. It's crony capitalism, which there was a series of studies done, series of surveys done in the UK around young people's attitudes and appetites towards capitalism as a whole. And when they were questioned, they basically didn't have a very good view of capitalism. But when they were told, when they had it explained to them that what they had an issue with was not capitalism, it was crony capitalism, they went, you're right.
Yeah.
So that's where national capitalism comes into it, and it borrows the elements of traditional industrial policy. And for people who want to have a look at industrial policy done very well and at scale, there is the Japanese example post Second World War. There is the South Korean example post Korean conflict. The Taiwanese example. And one of my all-time favorite books is called Freedom's Forge, and it's by a American historian and economic writer by the name of Arthur Herman, and it's called Freedom's Forge. And that basically looks at and tracks the industrial policy that was developed in the early years post the Great Depression. Now, there were some serious fundamental problems with how the Roosevelt administration handled the Great Depression, but industrial policy, at least for manufacturing, was not one of them. And that is essentially what allowed America to gear up ahead of formally entering the Second World War. Now, all of this, and I don't want people to think I'm advocating for Australia to create a military-industrial complex on the scale of the United States, because as somebody who works in the defence industry, and if there's any defence people listening, this will shock you, the US military-industrial complex is a special interest client group that is also subject to the benefits of crony capitalism. And that has been shown writ large. But the industrial policy and the key regulatory changes, the policy levers, and I don't want to say, it's not incentivization, but the direction and guidance provided by government policy during that time is what set America up for success. So first things first, we need to get our energy sorted. In Australia, our cost of energy is through the roof. I think we're second only to the United Kingdom in terms of most expensive energy markets in the world. Take the ideology out of it, just look at what works. Our second one and a key one is industrial relations reform, which is not a popular thing to say, particularly given every time a centre-right government tries to implement any form of industrial relations reform in Australia. Automatically it gets tied to work choices. Ironically, work choices would have provided more tangible benefits for the individual by giving them the power to bargain for themselves. And you and I do that with our boss all the time. Which is beneficial for us. And then, of course, it is planning, regulation, and how that impacts the ability for industry to make considered long-term investments.
Yeah. And finally, Steve, I want to ask from an employer perspective, for HR managers and teams listening to this, what can be done at the business level to help support, the economic and productivity and sovereignty growth and advancement of Australia?
That's a good question.
Other than setting an example, I suppose.
Well, setting an example is a big one. I would say the biggest thing you can do is imagine that your employees are your children.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want them to succeed and have a fruitful life?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you want them to be wage slaves, immiserated, living in pods? I know that's a bit theatrical, but do you want them to have a meaningful, engaged life where they can enjoy all the opportunities, quite frankly, that you had, and enjoy the benefits of life today? Or do you want them to be immiserated, atomized individuals who basically solely go to work to live, and that's it?
Yeah.
View them as your children.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I always enjoy chatting with you and certainly enjoy listening to you in the newsroom. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to have a chat with me.
Thanks for having me, mate.
And thank you to the listener for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give us a rating and review on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, as it'll help other HR professionals discover and enjoy this show. And if you've got ideas for other episodes we can run, please get in touch at editor@hrleader.com.au. You can also reach us on social media. See you again next time.